Now, our top focus on Beyond the World has its eyes on Bali. US President Joe Biden will meet China's Xi Jinping later today in a high-stakes sit-down as tensions brew between the two global powers. Both Beijing and Washington have confirmed the meeting, which since its announcement has managed to overshadow the upcoming G20 summit. The two leaders are meeting for the first time in person since Biden took office and are expected to discuss a range of issues with the main focus on Taiwan, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and North Korea's nuclear ambitions.
I know I'm coming in stronger, but I don't need that. I know Xi Jinping. I spent more time with any other world leader. I know him well. He knows me. There's no, we have very little misunderstanding. We just got to figure out where the red lines are, what are the most important things to each of us going into the next 2 years. And his circumstances changed, to state the obvious, at home. And so we're going to have I think, I've always had straightforward discussion. There's never any miscalculation about where each of us stand. And I think that's critically important in our relationship.
Now, on the eve of his meeting with Xi, Biden told Asian leaders in Cambodia that U.S. communication lines with China would stay open to prevent conflict, with tough talks almost certain in the days ahead. The White House has said that both leaders will also assess how to responsibly manage competition and work together where their interests align. From the chip market to the Taiwan crisis, both US and China have seen divisions deepen in the last 1 year. Xi's government on multiple occasions has been criticized by the Biden administration. US recent action in the region in Taiwan undermining China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Biden and Xi, who have held 5 phone or video calls since Biden became president in January 2021, and in the last time they met, it was during the Obama presidency, where Biden was the vice president. Washington has said that a joint statement is unlikely to be issued after the meeting, but adds that it could help stabilize the ties between the two nations. Now, to get us the latest, we are being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Welcome to the broadcast, Siddhant. The US president and his Chinese counterpart are all set to meet today in Bali. Now, Taiwan will be a top focus, of course, but what kind of negotiations are you expecting?
Well, later today, both the leaders are going to meet here in Bali, Indonesia, and we know that there are worries, whether it's North Korea, whether it's the Taiwan Strait crisis, and of course, the trade issues between the world's #1 and #2 economy. But nonetheless, the fact that both leaders are meeting, and this is their first in-person meeting, the meeting between the US President Joe Biden. They have previously met, but Joe Biden as the vice president, but this time Joe Biden as the president. So there are a lot of expectations as well from the meeting as to what is expected to transpire. We have heard what White House and of course US President has emphasized and talked about, they're going to talk about, but both leaders come after domestic developments in their country, the midterm elections in the US, and of course Xi Jinping being reaffirmed as the top leader of the Chinese Communist Party for the 3rd time. So essentially, with the domestic issues perhaps on the backside, they will be focusing on how both countries can engage in a much more positive way rather than what we have seen in past few months and perhaps past few years as well. But the relationship has only become shriller and shriller. We know that the Americans have proposed a number of initiatives, projects, and of course Chinese have their own projects, including the controversial CPEC, which passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So there is a kind of tiff on several initiatives and ways in which both countries deal with issues like infrastructure. We know the Chinese debt crisis, something that US has been very vocal about, and of course there is worry in the Indian subcontinent over that. We saw the situation in Sri Lanka, the economic crisis. So largely this is a meeting that is a high stakes meeting, and many would be keen to see the outcomes of the meeting.
Right, Siddhant, I want to go back to a point that you made earlier. You're right, the power politics is a little different this time. Biden is coming strong with Democrats just winning an unexpected Senate win. Xi Jinping has just cemented his power for the next 5 years. And you also called it like a positive sign. But I want to ask you, how will this positive sign transpire in today's talks?
Well, both sides will be keen that when it comes to the relationship, it is taken forward essentially from what it has been currently, and both sides will be keen to put a kind of personal investment as well. Remember that while Xi Jinping has been reaffirmed as the chief or the leader of the Chinese Communist Party for the third time, he is keen for more international engagement. We have seen that with the number of incoming visits to Beijing, including, of course, by the Pakistani Prime Minister, by the leaders from Vietnam, and of course the German Chancellor as well. Now, this is the first international visit outside of the country, essentially foreign visit of Xi Jinping, and he's keen to engage with world leaders. The big focus, of course, remains on his meeting with the US President Joe Biden, but he's also going to meet the French President, more European leadership. But when it comes to the Indian Prime Minister, so far there is no indication that there will be any meeting between the two sides. We know that relationship between the two countries had gone southwards after the Galwan incident, an incident in which India lost 20 of its soldiers. So worries remain on the Indian side over what the Chinese have been doing at the line of actual control, and that is one of the reasons that there is no meeting that's going to happen here in Bali between the two leaders as well.
Absolutely. Now, I was going to come to India. How is New Delhi monitoring this meeting with Biden and Xi? And not just that, as you just mentioned, he also has high-stakes meeting with other world leaders. You know, because any status quo relating to China, if that changes, it is bound to have a ripple effect here in New Delhi. So, can you elaborate on how New Delhi is specifically monitoring these many meetings?
Well, India will be closely watching all these meetings, the bilateral meeting between the world leaders. Of course, today is the focus on the meeting between the US and the Chinese side. But essentially, it's a packed agenda for the Indian Prime Minister. He has 10 bilateral meetings. The meetings with the UK Prime Minister, with the French President, and a strong likelihood of a meeting with the US President Joe Biden as well. So largely, this is an occasion for the world leaders to engage. We know that the pandemic is abating and there have been more international engagements. We also remember the days when the G20 summit happened virtually, and the fact that it's happening in person for the second time in a row is something that leaders will be looking forward to. And there are a lot of moments, pull asides, informal moments where leaders can engage, and the outcomes of these meetings, whether it's a pull aside, whether it's a bilateral, or whether it's the conversation at the high table, do make a lot of impact when it comes to global geopolitics. Remember, this is the same grouping that took strong action when it comes to the issue of black money. This is the same group that took a concerted effort when it comes to the COVID crisis, when UN was seen dysfunctional. It took a call on infusing money into the global economy, and of course the debt relief for the countries, for the underdeveloped countries at a time when COVID crisis had wrecked the global economy. So whatever happens here in Bali or previously in Italy where the summit happened, and Saudi Arabia and Tokyo, impacts everyone, whether the person is from New York or New Delhi or perhaps here in Indonesia.
All right, Siddhant, we will be tracking all those developments. Thank you for joining us. That was our principal diplomatic correspondent reporting from Bali.